Saints Row, despite its ups and downs, has always been one of my favorite franchises to play. Across all the games, Saints Row 1 was hard as shit, Saints Row 2 was a crime game masterpiece, Saints Row the Third started the Tony Hawk's downhill jam of the franchise, lacking in a lot of the previous entries' features, and Saints Row 4 decided to go from an April Fool's joke to an expansion pack to a superhero simulator fighting aliens and becoming the president. Oh, and Get Out of Hell, which solidified the ending of one timeline to bring us into another, with Saints Row, the 2022 reboot.
Thank you, God.
Now before I go mad in depth with this game, let me briefly talk about the marketing leading up to release, because you can't tell a story without starting from the beginning, and it all started with that damn. Around August of 2021, Volition promoted a teaser for the reboot with the image of a wall progressively getting covered in graffiti, until finally revealed by Jeff Keighley that the rebooted franchise would be making a long-awaited return at Gamescom that year. A lot of the Saints Row community took the wall as hope that the series would eventually go back to its roots of being a grounded open-world gangster game, similar to the games of Saints Row 1 and 2. But boy, were I and the rest of the community mistaken apparently, because the CGI reveal trailer would sour the expectations of just about everyone.
What do you mean everyone?
August 25th was the reveal of the CGI announcement at Gamescom, and boy, I have never seen a community that I've been a part of for around a decade get so upset over a CGI trailer. I mean, look at that like to dislike ratio. You would have thought this was Infinite Warfare with a bar like this. The Saints Row community was red hot, with various comments ranging from "this game worries me" to "I wish the real Saints came back to kill these bastards." Oh, and don't even think I forgot about how poorly handled the backlash was on Volition's end with the "haters gonna hate" gif, which cemented the thoughts in the minds of the old Saints Row fans that their franchise was pandering to a far younger audience and apparently going woke for brownie points with the SJW crowd. A lot of people were rightfully angry about this new direction the Saints were going in, and for months on end, the rage continued as more and more was revealed about the game. Because let's face it, who was this appealing to in the Saints Row community? It's not catering to the OG fans because the gangster element is far past gone. Shit doesn't even exist anymore. And it doesn't appeal to the fans of the more outrageous Saints Row games because it lacked anything that remotely had that appeal, especially when the characters, location, and story all feel so watered down compared to the original series. Fast forward and a lot more trailers dropped, a lot more dislikes were thrown Volition's way, and it seemed like the quiet minority was very loud in what they didn't want, which was something that seemed like the complete opposite of what Saints Row was at this point. Especially when, even before the announcement, a lot of Saints Row fans were clamoring for either a remake of the first game, a remaster of the second game, or a reboot with the original cast. Literally the only video that seemed to get a more positive reaction from the audience was the customization showcase, along with the boss factory. Customization was looking like it was going to be A1, especially since it was Saints Row, and a lot more gameplay was being shown off through the various media outlets as well as content creators, somewhat soothing the worries of some of the players that thought it would just be a Fortnite x Saints Row collab. The boss factory released and got people a bit more hyped, and now with content creators releasing more and more content with the opening chapters of the narrative and gameplay, either a lot were still worried about the game, or a lot of the community accepted it for what it was. And that's where we are right now. With the release of the Saints Row reboot, people visited New Zealand for a hot minute, downloaded the game early, and then the game was panned by both critics and fans alike, with the general consensus pretty much being, the game is mid and busted as fuck. Or AF, as Kevin would put it. So with that long-winded intro out of the way, let's completely break down why Saints Row 2022 fails at not only being a Saints Row game, but a bad game in general. So let's start small and work our way up, starting with gameplay. It's gameplay's
What's supposed to mean?
Just means
Shooting is pretty, well, shoddy. Every time you aim, you never really feel like you're locked onto a person properly without bashing the triggers continuously. And it doesn't help that the sensitivity is all over the place as well. I mean, you could tweak the controls to your heart's content, but when a game out of the box is buggy enough to fuck up the sensitivity and lock on, you know you have a problem. And Saints Row has an abundance of problems. But let's be fair for the moment and act like a lot of the bugs aren't there. Getting into skirmishes with the various gangs along with the cops aren't bad, but considering you do that for 90% of the game, it wears its welcome a lot over time, mostly due to its bullet spongy ass enemies. They are already spongy enough, why add a shield to these enemies? A few things I like about combat though, and trust me, there are a few things, is that the enemy factions come after the player a little bit differently, with the Panteros being more close quarters, charging you and shrugging off bullets, the idols swarming you and circling around you and can flank you if you're not paying attention, and Marshall trying to contain you with their high-grade military tech. I think that unique enemy interactions between you and the gangs that you fight is a pretty unique addition to the Saints Row series, but not by much when everyone feels the same after a while. As much as I like takedowns, having them be required to regain health is kinda stupid instead of hiding behind cover to regenerate or eat food to replenish mid-firefight. When you're constantly getting into heated battles, you'd want to stay in the fight near instantaneously with something that replenishes health instead of waiting for a meter to fill to give the player permission to regain health. In Saints Row 1 and 2, you could replenish with food you bought from stores. In Saints Row the 3rd, you really just had to get behind cover to regenerate any health, and in Saints Row 4, you at the very least had health packs when killing enemies. So the flow of combat kinda gets killed when you're constantly having to fill up a meter. Also, when it comes to combat, it feels really outdated. There's no cover system, you can't change shoulders, hell, the button to crouch is literally up on the D-pad instead of replacing the kick on the right stick. It's excess for no reason. You know what else is excessive for no reason? The skill and perk system. The skill system allows for the player to unlock various super moves and buffs to help level out the playing field, but most of them are straight doo-doo. Flame punch, smokescreen, proximity mine, most of these are garbage. Most of the time you're going to need health, and all the necessary perks required for gameplay are unlocked very early on, so you never really need to touch the rest of them at all. The grenade, Tough Mother, transfusion are really the only good ones that assist majorly in battle. Also, side note, why the fuck are grenades a perk? Shouldn't that be a separate weapon on the weapon wheel? Why the fuck do I got a combo kill just to do that? Early on in the game, you get satchel charges, a literal throwing explosive. If you already have a slot for grenades in the form of satchel charges, just have them literally be a regular weapon in the game. The combat restrictions make no fucking sense. As for the perks, there are some solid ones like running faster when you're nearing death and auto loot for ammo and cash, but these are just background perks that assist for certain situations. Let's move shooting out of the way in favor of driving. Driving is fine. It's mostly hindered by the floaty ass physics engine, as well as the arcadey drifting that feels a little behind compared to modern games. I don't hate it, and I also don't expect Saints Row's driving to be realistic, but I'd just much rather have a realistic handbrake than just making wide as fuck drifts that are basically required to turn corners. You're basically gonna be drifting every time you turn because turning normally has such a low radius. It just generally feels stiff at times and floaty at others. It isn't bad, it just never feels as good as it should be. On a positive note, I do like the idea of car combat being introduced into the Saints Row series with sideswiping, but the AI just straight up kills any enjoyment of it. By doing very stupid shit to catch up with the player, like teleporting out of nowhere or speeding up like it's got a rocket strapped to its ass, just to attempt to give the sense of intensity during those moments. Previous Saints Row games solved the police and gang notoriety ages ago. Hell, they even tried to rip off Grand Theft Auto 4's escape radius, and they even fucked that up. Even getting away from gangs and police is beyond easy. All you have to do is drive down the block and you're golden. I don't know, man. This notoriety system is fucking busted. Like a lot of things in this game, driving is one hell of a mixed bag. Staying on the topic of cars, let's talk about the radio. Saints Row has always put me onto some fire music with the course of the series, with talents like LP with Full Retard from Saints Row 4, and Saints Row 2 had Paramore, My Chemical Romance, some solid Renge from Beanie Man, but in Saints Row 2022, a lot of the music is really forgettable. Outrun is probably the best station in the game because it's such a simple station. Just retrowave, no lyrics, all business. Other stations like Flex, for example, have some hits with Bald by JPEG Mafia, even if it is the remix, Mr. Rage by Trippie Redd, Blackout by Group Therapy, Ice by Courtney Bell, which is catchy as shit, but that's it. The classical station in every Saints Row game will always be my go-to whenever I want to cause carnage in the open world peacefully. Tumbleweed is underrated and fits Santo Aleso perfectly. The drop is annoying, and if I hear DMX's Party Up off Cypher one more time, Y'all gonna make me lose my mind. Rest in peace DMX, but man does that song appear a lot in this game. Dos Ochos, El Latido, Overdrive, and surprisingly Nuclear Blast of all stations, I'm not a big fan of. So you can tell from hearing my opinion of the stations, it's pretty hit or miss. But let's talk about one of the biggest selling points for any Saints Row game: customization. Customization in this game is pretty solid if you have the time and patience for it, or if you don't, the creations by the community are top notch, having some of the best creations known to man, or some unholy monstrosity. But I have a few gripes. First, the lack of sliders for character customization. In previous entries, you had an abundance of sliders to finely tune your character to make them how you wanted. Now we have presets and very minimal sliders, which is kinda lame, but I think the reason it's this way is to make it easier for the animations to convey what they need for the cutscenes. That's my theory at least. Clothing also had upgrades and downgrades. The return to layered clothing is pretty sweet, but they kind of fucked it up. Instead of being an alternative setting you can apply to your clothing, there's just a separate clothing piece with the alternative wear option. And what hurts more is that some of the layers of these options can't be customized when editing. Same with jewelry and wristwear, you can't wear both at the same time, yet Saints Row 2 figured that shit out a decade plus ago. Another major gripe I have with clothing though is that the best clothing is locked behind criminal ventures, and the various pop-up shops didn't need to exist when you could just consolidate them into 3 new stores instead of having them scattered all over. I understand the reasonings to provide incentive to explore the map, I get it, but why go all the way out in the desert for a whack-ass t-shirt and minimal selection? It just seems kinda like a waste of data to me. Also, being able to customize on the fly is good and also kind of weird, because you should be able to go into a plastic surgeon, but at the same time I could understand why people would want to tweak on the fly. It just makes for easier of access, but it also kind of kills whatever liveliness you'd add to the world. Car customization got the biggest overhaul in my opinion. Paint age, grime, underglow, changing the horns and engine sound effects, that shit is sick. Hell, we even have boat and heli customization now, which I think is a first for the series. You even have vehicle-specific challenges and rewards, which are always dope, along with the various accessories for car and air combat, or if Jim Robs is too tedious for you. But let's talk about crib customization. You don't actually get to customize your crib as you'd expect from older games, but in its replacement, you get to place various collectibles found in the open world in specific areas in the crib, which is kinda lame. I don't hate this trade-off too much, because you can find some cool collectibles in the open world, but it just doesn't hit the same. And on the topic of cribs, there's only 2. Shit, technically there's only 1. Like, as soon as you unlock the Saints HQ, the apartment just vanishes off the map, so you essentially get 1 crib. That sucks, especially when there's been so much variety in previous games. With a map this large, you'd think there'd be more cribs to own that fit the theme of each district. Oh, and let's quickly gloss over gang customization. Honestly, it isn't needed, because you can't recruit them outside of a late game perk, so what's it even doing here? You don't even see them out on the streets. Also, the designs for the gangs are awful. They literally have the word criminal and a gun on a shirt. Like, are we sure this isn't parody? Cause it ain't funny, that's for sure. Also, quick note on weapon customization. It's alright. If it didn't glitch out and revert all the choices I made at least. Plus, all the more unique weapons require so much grind in missions and in the open world. By the time you get them, they don't even feel worth it. Saints Row 4 had gun customization on lock with weapon skins that were just there. They just allowed you to switch that shit on the fly. But that's not to say that what we have isn't serviceable. It's just a slight step down from what a lot of Saints Row fans come to expect from a Saints Row game. Alright, the open world. What is an open world game without its open world? Nothing. And Santo Ileso basically has exactly that. Nothing. Outside of ventures and side content, there is nothing in this big-ass open world chunk of dingo-ass map to do, which is crazy to me. You have a casino district with no gambling, you have a go-kart circuit with no go-karting, you have a golf course with no fun golfing minigame, you don't even have arcade machines. But I hear some of you now, minigames don't really play a role in the open world. Shut up. Minigames along with small details make the open world you're in more lively and lived in, which is why Saints Row 2 kicks so much ass, because it not only had a great open world with great verticality to it, but it had life to it with its minigames, peds, and diversions. But Santo Ileso has none of that. But you know what you can do? You get to blow up armored cars for shit pay, and you get to kill small groups of thugs for bonuses. Big fucking whoop. We live in the day and age of Uber Eats, and we can't even have an evolution of the taxi diversion with a FB's delivery service? Or a fighter or medic diversion? Oh, what about collectibles? Oh yeah, collectibles are fine. Though there's no tagging, even though Nina is an artist who throws up a tag in the game's campaign. I'm not surprised that a game series that lost its identity so fucking bad wouldn't include something like tagging in its reboot. Hell, there isn't even stunt jumps anymore. I mean, there is stunt jumps, but like, they're not like, oh, you found one out of like 50 stunt jumps. It's just like, you just jump off shit. That's it. When it comes to collectibles, you just take pictures traversing the game world for unlockable statues for your crib, materials for clothing, or simply just sightseeing. Or you collect drug packets, dumpster dive, or go to a secret shooting range and collect stuff from windmills. Which isn't a bad thing due to the rewards the games give you, but man, the grind to get those rewards is just not worth it at all. And then there's side hustles. Choplifting is literally grabbing something and taking it back. In Pony Express, you take a package from point A and deliver it to point B. Except, it's under a time limit. You'd think a game with vehicular combat in it would take advantage of that by reintroducing activities like Demolition Derby or racing to improve on them, but no, this is what we get. We have go-karts in this game. Why can't we race them? It's just pathetic that a game like the very first Saints Row from 2006 can still kick the shit out of a 2022 release. Wingsuit Saboteur boils down to flying from one location to the next, blowing up radio dishes. And riding shotgun is just a better version of Guardian Angel, but a worse version of trafficking somehow. And finally, we have Atcha, which is just one wave of survival. Just one wave. Just one. You're telling me we have a notoriety system that progressively gets harder the more damage you do, and you lob us one wave? What the fuck? In fairness, you can adjust the difficulty on the side hustle with the star system, but for it to ultimately be one wave is just stupid. You know what could have been a better alternative? Crowd control. For those that don't know what crowd control is, you have to protect the target from crazed fans, with each level progressively getting more difficult, which would have played amazingly as a polar opposite to the wanted app, even if the melee in this game is doo-doo juice. Every single side hustle has better activities from its predecessors that could have been implemented, but they weren't. So we have these bland, interchangeable, and identical ass missions past as activity. And the same goes for criminal ventures. Don't believe me? Jim Robs is the same as Bright Future, which is the same as Was Yours, which is the same as Cleanup Crew, which is the same thing as Plan the Saints, which is the same thing as Let's Pretend. I mean, outside of small tweaks at an attempt to make all of these driving ventures feel the same, at the end of the day, you're still moving from point A to point B in a vehicle. There's nothing but monotonous and tiring creative bankruptcy by Volition here. As for the rest of the criminal ventures, they're still tedious. First Strike isn't Fight Club, and the melee is ass anyways, so don't even bother. Cactus Radio isn't any different from Atcha aside from hitting these annoying ass towers. And Let's Pretend doesn't even allow you to take part in the heist you plan. You're the getaway driver. Cutting Edge is no different from just taking pictures of collectibles. It's a joke. As for returning activities like Insurance Fraud and Mayhem, they're somehow worse than the previous entries. The only honest to good venture is Eureka Baiter because it's short, not that repetitive, and you get cool weapons from it. That's how the majority of these ventures should be. But before I die from a brain-induced aneurysm, let's go back to Saints Row 2. You had Demolition Derby, you had Street, Boat, and Air Racing, you had Trailblazing, Mayhem, Insurance Fraud, Hitman, Septic Avenger, Fight Club, Escort, Heli Assault, Snatch, and just an abundance of activities that were completely different from one another that had great replayability and wonderful rewards. This is a game from 2008 that demolishes every single aspect outside of graphics against this modern day piece of shit. A lot of goofies on Twitter would say, but SLEEPGANG, it isn't 2008 anymore. Then bitch, get me a time machine to take my ass back to 2008 so I can stay in elementary school drinking rancid chocolate milk and go home playing the best game in the series in the middle of a financial recession. If you can't do that, then I'm gonna keep touting that Saints Row 2 will forever smash the shit out of this 2022 piece of fuck. The reboot doesn't even fucking come close. Look, if you enjoy this game, that's fine. I don't want to take that away from you. Hell, I can't say that I didn't like parts of what I played, but man, if you're a longtime fan of this franchise like I am, I feel bad for you, because you'll never get to experience a new peak for Saints Row games. But you know what's fortunate for new players? All the old players are just going to tell them to play way better games, and they're probably going to have far better experiences. So when that Saints Row 2 patch comes out, and the online gets revived somehow, all the people at Volition are going to say, I wonder why. You know why. Because they're better games. But speaking of terrible experiences, let's talk about bugs. But before we get into that, let's talk about the state of gaming today. This sell it now, fix it later mentality these game publishers are abiding by is just terrible. Just terrible. I miss when games were near flawless on launch. There are very far and few between now, and that shouldn't be the status quo today. It just shouldn't. Whether it's shitty developers or publishers or CEOs, this shit's gotta stop, because more gamers are gonna realize that their time is being wasted and their hobby just isn't worth it anymore because of the state you're releasing these games in. And that shit goes for you, Volition. When a game crashes, that's one thing, but when a game refuses to launch on your release for your PC port, that's when we have a problem. Now sure, the game got patched up, and I haven't had much taint my experience on my second playthrough, but on launch day, oh man, this shit was shaping up to be dead on arrival. Now, I don't have too much footage of my earliest glitches that I encountered, because I played it for my own pleasure, not worrying about YouTube, but I can still describe some of them, like T-posing, crashing, not starting up on launch, ugly popping, no cars during insurance fraud, out-of-sync subtitles, no pedestrians when driving, falling through the map randomly, the zoomed vehicle glitch, randomly failing missions, characters vanishing out of thin air, cars teleporting when in chases, customization options resetting, the player icon not appearing on the map, and so much more. I don't know if it's shitty developers or studios or what, but Jesus Christ, the last saving grace for this game to even have a decent reception outside of the main campaign, outside of gameplay and activities, would have been if the game wasn't a buggy mess on launch. The state of gaming today fucking sucks, except for indie games. You guys take your time and I respect you for that, I do. But if a game releases in a shit state, it low-key deserves to get review bombed. Alright, I gotta move on, I can't talk about this anymore. There's a lot of stuff I didn't like in this game, but I want to talk about the stuff I actually did like, along with some nitpicks. I mentioned customization before, so I don't need to bring it up again. Some of the perks and takedowns are pretty neat, but one of the things I liked a lot about the reboot was the Wanted app. It is a beautiful evolution of the hitman and assassination activities from the previous games. Instead of just going out and killing a specific target with a specific weapon or luring them out by doing various objectives, like the older games, you get tasked with getting hired to kill or assist a target with a little story attached to it. For example, I accept a mission to kill a baby boomer per the request of someone's grandma. Granny over here wants me to take her to the target because her credit card information got stolen or whatever, and when she gets there, she murks the guy with a pump shotty. That's badass, and the fact that there's nearly a dozen of these is really cool, and they're all similar in quality. Wingsuiting as a replacement for parachuting but also acting as a grounded alternative for gliding like in Saints Row 4 is a pretty neat addition. I just wish they did more with it. You could have also had wingsuit racing and time trials, base jumping, anything outside of the wingsuit saboteur side hustle and jumping on cars, but oh well. I also like the fact that you could basically adjust anything in the settings. HUD size, map size, difficulty, accessibility, sensitivity. It's definitely the most accessible Saints Row game, and I can give it points for that. As much as I despise it for being in a Saints Row game, the LARPing missions were actually kind of enjoyable, despite not adding much to the main campaign outside of a new criminal venture. But I thought it was cute. I've always wanted to go to a LARPing event like this. I can't really harp on it, because we've had weirder shit in the Saints Row games, like clones, superpowers, and a tournament of death ran by a fucking cat, so I'm not really fazed by the LARPer missions. They just take a little too long in my opinion. Alright, so here are my abundance of nitpicks. Outside of the ones I mentioned earlier in the script before. Why can't I flip over cars when they're upside down? Why in the mission Nina's car, when you're tasked to mess with Gabriel's car, we just mess it up with customizing it instead of blowing it up like you would instinctively would? Why isn't the Boot Hill mission aggressive recruiting a replayable game mode in the open world? Why do a good amount of missions not have background music? Actually, let me test this shit out. Here's a chunk of raw footage from a part of a mission. It has no music to accompany it.
Do it. Fight as a team.
Here's that same exact footage with some of the BGM edited in.
Shit, the cops found us. Let's show them how the Saints do it. Fight as a team.
Bruh. Why the fuck is there a one-button shoot mechanic on interactable objects? Shouldn't shooting at it with your aiming be enough? Did we not learn from explosive red barrels? Why is the one stealth segment in this game so fucking awful? Why do the idols take selfies during combat? I know they're supposed to be obnoxious, but really? I had to fool myself thinking this was like a health regeneration or buff mechanic, but no. It just happens in game. Why does there have to be such a long drive between missions? Why do I have to start the mission to know the location, abort the mission, fast travel to said location, then start the mission? Why are emotes purchasable? That makes no sense because literally every other Saints Row game just has them out of the gate. Why bring back freckle bitches if you're only gonna censor it and have one mission revolving around it? Why is wingsuiting used so sparsely during the campaign? Hell, it isn't even canonically explained in the narrative, you just have it. Why is Snickerdoodle even in this game? She serves no purpose. I have way too many small gripes with this game. I'm just gonna move on. I'm just gonna stop here and move on. Alright, I think I'm mentally ready to talk about the story. It sucks. Roll credits. No, but in all seriousness, the story is terrible, especially for a reboot of the franchise. The story starts off where it ends, with the Saints presumably in power of the whole city, having a party celebrating their success and victory. A man by the name of Antonio Espina approaches the party for the Saints with money in hand, hoping to build a partnership. But who cares about that? Time to have some fun. We are the leader of the Saints after all. Then we get on an Instagram live broadcast telling our fallen enemies that they rule the city till we zoom out and see our boss get buried alive by an unknown figure, seeing visions of better times that the player hasn't experienced yet. So we beat the gangs, took over the city, then got betrayed and buried alive without knowing who any of these characters are or getting introduced to them. Cool! Then we get rewinded back to a couple of months and meet the boss when they were still working under the military corporation Marshall. One thing I will give this game credit for is the fact that they made the boss a trained killer, so we don't have to worry about a fucking thug becoming a superhero. But in this game, they're extremely jovial about killing. Throughout the narrative, there are plenty of instances where the boss is tonally inconsistent between being serious and making an abundance of quips that would make the MCU blush. Unlike in Saints Row 2, where the boss is a total sociopath that took shit from no one, despite being out of character for the activities. And in Saints Row the Third, where even though the boss was more willing to be a goof from time to time, they still remain serious throughout the most of the game's campaign. The writing just comes off poor when one second you're cracking jokes and in the same scene you shoot someone point blank. It makes little to no sense. After we do a few jobs for Marshall, we end up getting fired for not protecting the Codex. Does it serve any importance to the overall story? Is it a MacGuffin that the idols and Los Panteros will be clashing for throughout the game? No, it's just a meaningless item that only becomes a glorified trophy for your crib later on in the game. I never understood why it was presented so heavily in the marketing if the game itself doesn't even deem it important, but back to the story. After getting fired, we decided enough is enough and it's time for a change. By not moving out of the city and getting jobs and internships like a sane person, but by paying our student loans with dirty money and building a criminal empire. And to get Kev his waffle maker, I guess. Honestly, you could have not made this game's narrative harder to sell if you tried. Committing crimes to pay off student loans and making rent sounds extremely unappealing when the former games were about respect, power, and taking over the city as a street gang and or fighting aliens. These terribly written Saints had the biggest shoes to fill when it came to character and storytelling, and they ain't landed one drop of Saints flow in the size 12 that the original timeline made for itself, despite it being all over the place. Speaking of the characters, let's talk about them. Our character, the boss, in my opinion, is one of the most unlikable bosses I've ever played as. They're hypocritical in their mindset, very back and forth when it comes to their ideals, and overall the dumbass when it comes to running a criminal empire. Which I guess is the point they were trying to make when it came to the Nwali during the ending of the game, but we'll get to him later. Outside of the boss being military trained to justify how badass they are, there's little to no connection you make with them as the player outside of causing chaos in the open world, so you have nothing to latch onto. Honestly, the criminal ventures, if you just play them by yourself, make you feel more like a crime boss than the actual main campaign. Kevin is just cringe personified due to his writing. He's essentially an extremely boring Johnny Gat without any of the wit and characterization that makes Johnny Gat compelling. Johnny was a loyal, gun-toting, sociopathic killing machine and made sure every plan requires violence. He made jokes occasionally, but most of the time he was straight to the point. Johnny basically matched the personality of the boss in Saints Row 1 and 2, and basically became our best friend throughout the timeline of the old games. In Saints Row 2022, what do we have? A guy who loves cooking, wants to be a chef, and is a great DJ at parties and doesn't wear a shirt. Even when we do get character moments, like with Kevin's loyalty mission, all it adds is that he's an orphan. Like, what the fuck am I gonna do with this information? Cry? No! Why should I give a flying fuck about a character that lacks exactly that, character? Shaundi was a hoe also, but there was a purpose to it. She had a whole network of people she could work with to get an abundance of intel, but it was never at the forefront of her character. With Kevin, yeah, sure, he could garner a lot of attention, and he has a good amount of networks through the game's campaign by sleeping with everybody on the planet, but it's never used in a way that feels smart outside of, oh, I know someone. The only mission I can remember Kevin being somewhat useful in is the mission where you have to get taken off the Wanted app. That's it. Eli, despite having some of the more tolerable jokes in game, ultimately is a nothing burger of a character. Outside of being a major nerd and a grown adult man LARPing in the year 2022, there's nothing to him, nothing that makes him compelling compared to the various members of the Saints in the previous timeline. Quick question: what gang is Eli affiliated with? You'd think he'd be a part of Marshall like the boss was, but no. There's no affiliation with any of the other gangs in the game, so there's nothing for me to care about in the slightest. He quite literally doesn't even need to be in a gang. According to the boss, Eli has capabilities on creating a business, but also despises getting his hands dirty. So why the fuck is he even allowing himself to get gaslit into a street gang when he could have been fine on his own? People would think that Nina would probably have the most compelling narrative out of the three, but she doesn't. Not by a landslide. It's just as terrible. Alright, so Nina comes from the Panteros, a car-based gang similar to the Brotherhood or the West Side Rollers. They essentially have undergone a change in leadership, which causes friction between Nina and the gang to the point where she leaves the Panteros. Not a bad setup. The thing is, when it comes to Nina, she has the most undercooked, underdeveloped sense of sympathy towards her character, really just because they don't apply weight to that character. Like, oh, she has a car that she protects and doesn't want to risk it because it's her mother's heirloom. And then it gets destroyed later on in the game, and apparently I'm supposed to feel something for it, but I just don't. Build up for that matters. Build up for those moments matter. Understanding the reason for why the car is important before the car gets destroyed would be a far better setup and would actually make me feel for this character. Hell, even her revenge after that moment doesn't even feel satisfying. After her car gets destroyed, she enacts revenge on Sergio's truck and the forge, and Sergio has no reaction to this. Then he gets murked by the Nuwali. She doesn't even get revenge on the person who's been causing her problems. Great. So those are our three characters that we call the Saints now, even though no matter how much purple they fucking wear, they'll never be the Saints. I'm sorry, it's just that you're telling me these three Macaulay Culkins along with the boss are taking over an entire city? Hell no. It's even worse somehow for the fucking rival gangs. Holy shit, these gangs are awful. The idols don't exist in this game. They literally do not exist. They have no impact against the Saints outside of kidnapping Kevin, and once you beat him, you don't even realize it until way later. Who were the collective? We don't know. Did the idols have any motivations outside of causing chaos in Santo Ileso? We don't know. Do the idols even have a leader? We don't know. What was the point of these goofy-ass, Daft Punk-ass, neon dildo-holding bitches in the story? We don't know! Outside of stealing the codex, that doesn't even matter. There's nothing going on for these factions. Same with the Panteros. What do they do? What are they in Santo Ileso for? What are they trying to gain control of? We don't even have backstory or exposition for the main antagonists of the game. At least with Marshall, you have somewhat of an understanding of why they're in Santo Ileso, to combat gang violence. But these gangs are somehow even worse than the Syndicate in Saints Row the Third. How do you fuck up shit that's this simple? How? Anyways, back to the campaign. So we steal the D from the church, we begin to build up our empire through various gameplay and criminal ventures we have out there, something fast forward Barack Obama, and we come up to a point where we need to pay our crew by doing a train heist. And here enters our main antagonist, Nuwali, one of the biggest missed opportunities in Saints Row history. It kind of sucks too, because he could have been one of the most amazing characters in the game when it comes to quality and writing, but he even fails at that. But like I said, we'll get to him later. So anyways, you hire the Nuwali to do this train heist, but you don't actually do the train heist. You do this group retreat first before the train heist to make Nuwali warm up to you, and then you do the train heist. Sorry for the voice cracks. On the topic of the train heist, it's actually a pretty good mission in this segment. It's actually a fun mission to play, which makes sense since it's the most bombastic set piece in the whole game. There's also a hint of the Nuwali betraying you when you get hit by Marshall with the smoke grenades, which actually make me think as soon as Nuwali kills Sergio, the rest of his group would swarm in and steal the money for themselves, which would have been an amazing plot twist. But no, we get the money, have a money fight, in comes Marshall to say they own the rights to the Saints. We visit Myra Star to tank the stock of Marshall Industries by blowing up shit with an AI tank. We shoot Atticus in the head, we destroy Marshall. Then immediately after, it's the end of the game. And this is where all hope is lost, because now I get to talk about the plot twist that makes no fucking sense. So alright, so we're at the party the Saints were throwing in the beginning. We hang out with our crew, Nuwali shows up, and says fuck your life and stabs you. This, to me, at least was the biggest nail in the coffin for Saints Row as a franchise. There was no build up to the Nawali betraying you in the slightest, so this had no impact. You get buried alive and end up having this dream sequence that represents you having your life flash before your eyes. Then you end up in a board game that you literally see in only one cutscene prior. It had no meaning then, so it has no meaning now. Then it turns into a nightmare, filled with underdeveloped self-doubt. Then the fucking cat gives you a pep talk or something, you climb out of your grave, hunt down the Nawali, shoot him in the face, game over. That's literally the game. If it sounds like I'm glossing over a lot of the story, you're right, I am, but to be honest, this game is that mediocre. There's nothing deeper than what I'm telling you right now. Alright, so let's talk about Nawali's heel turn. It makes no sense. He captures your friends to force them to be his friends, but why? Is his lonely ass antisocial? Could he not be friends with his own crew? You know, the Nawali? His whole character arc is, you capture him, you free him, you befriend him, and then he stabs you. That's it. None of the story makes any sense. It feels like a lot of the script feels cut out and gutted, but even if that was the case, it probably wouldn't have saved this game if those scenes were reinstated. This Saints Row game fails at everything that it tries to do. Its story is ass, its gameplay is bloated and janky as fuck, open world is empty and lifeless, criminal ventures are beyond repetitive, the grind towards rewards is terrible, the characters are weak, the antagonists somehow even weaker, and let's not forget, this game to a lot of players is still a buggy mess. I never thought that as a long-time Saints Row fan since 2011 that I would be saying this, but fuck Saints Row, fuck Volition, and fuck whatever comes afterwards that isn't the Saints Row 2 patch. Fuck this game. It's not worth $60, it's not even worth pirating. If you're new to the series, I feel so sorry for you. You might think this is one of the funnest games in recent memory, and you'd be right in your opinion because you never followed the series front to back, and you've never been scarred like we have. But let me tell you this, there are far better Saints Row games out there. Saints Row 2 is undoubtedly the peak of the goddamn franchise, and I suggest you play that. Just go play that. Get it on PC, mod the fuck out of it, get it when the patch comes out, or just play it on an emulator, grab one of your old consoles and buy it off of eBay and play it through there. Just go play Saints Row 2 and you'll realize how good that fucking game is. Don't play this 2022 piece of garbage. If you want a serious story and fun open world, play Saints Row 2 wherever you can get it. If you're looking for something more absurd, play Saints Row 3 or Saints Row 4, maybe even Get Out of Hell. If you're looking for something to just simply kill time, get an Xbox or Xenia and play Saints Row 1 from 2006. There's a Saints Row for everyone, but I don't deem Saints Row 2022 good for human consumption. It's really sad though, because you could have had a really good game with these characters, with this premise, if it was written way better, if the gameplay was done way better, and if it worked way better. You could have made this crew and the villains work if you just followed the formula that made Saints Row great in the first place. You could have had good gameplay if you're willing to improve on the fan favorite activities in the reboot. You could have had it all, Volition, but you fucked it up bad, man. And I'm so fucking heartbroken about it. This reboot could have stuck the landing, but it base jumped straight off a bridge. Hopefully, if Volition manages to pull off multiplayer, I might give Volition a piece of my broken heart again. But with this shitty combat system in place, I highly fucking doubt it. Speaking of multiplayer, someone is actually in the beginning stages of working on a multiplayer mod for the Saints Row the 3rd Remastered. Hopefully that doesn't get shut down before it releases, but show its support anyways. There's also even a Discord server. Okay. Anyways, it's time for me to go. I know that this review might come off a little bit fucking janky, but to be honest, does this shitty as fuck game deserve a proper review? I don't think so. I can't talk about this reboot anymore. But if you do want to hear me discuss more about Saints Row as well as other video games in general, consider hitting that subscribe button on this left ass cheek and support me if you can. I've been SLEEPGANG and thank you for watching.